Hi, my name is Shannon Hodges, and I'm professor of clinical mental health counseling at Niagara University, a longtime counselor and therapist treating trauma, PTSD, and others. And I'll be making this video on post-traumatic growth, reclaiming meaning and purpose in life with a focus on addressing triggers, trauma triggers, and treating. I want to start off saying with an acknowledgement. I wish to acknowledge traditional landowners the world over. I also wish to pay my respects and acknowledge elders past, present, and emerging. I want to piggyback on that and say I look forward to a healthier relationship with our Indigenous people, both here in the United States and abroad. So, all right. Let me tell you a little about myself. I'm a doctorate degree in counseling and an advanced certificate in trauma counseling. I'm a licensed mental health counselor, nationally certified, etc. I have a lot of experience in counseling people who have been traumatized from ages 5 to nearly 90. I have many years experience, etc. Now, I do not know everything. All right. So part of what happens at the best trainings is we take existing knowledge that we have in an area and we build on it with the people who teach us, and sometimes the people who are being trained with us. It's what I call constructivist type education, and I think that fits very well with the mental health counseling field. All right. Now let me just transition a little bit here. Part of what's really important in managing triggers, managing trauma, managing depression, anxiety, managing all the things life can bring us is this. Nietzsche had this quote about the person, and I'm going to update it. If that person with a why can endure almost any how. What's important in our lives is that we find our why. That's what's really important to us. And I'll be talking somewhat about that. Finding your why. Viktor Frankl talked about that probably as well as anybody, and he knew a lot about that. And also, I work from a mindfulness-based cognitive therapy approach, which includes body work and thoughts and emotions and etc. And I want to talk about what mindfulness means so that it's well understood. I'm going to borrow from John Kabat-Zinn. And Kabat-Zinn says, mindfulness is paying attention purposefully in the present moment without judgment, using wisdom and understanding. Now, for a long time, I wanted to know what he meant by wisdom. And what he talked about later was self-compassion. And that's part of that is that non-judgmental part, but part of self-compassion also is being kind to ourselves. Because what happens when we're stressed is we give ourselves very negative self-statements. If we talk to those around us the way we talk to ourselves inside our head, we would have no family and no friends. So part of mindfulness-based cognitive therapy is being kinder and gentler to ourselves, not making excuses for ourselves, but just learning from our difficulties and being kind to ourselves. I will talk about that also. All right. Just some basic training objectives, just understanding the nature of trauma, its impact on thinking, behavior, brain, and body, and learning how to manage and heal it. Now, I want to say very clearly, trauma treatment, fully healing requires intervention by a qualified mental health professional. This video is not, it would not be adequate enough to help somebody heal from trauma. It might serve as ancillary information or training. It also is food for thought for those people who notice others in their network who may be traumatized, but it's not intended to replace professional psychotherapy. Now, what is trauma? Well, broadly defined, it's a deeply disturbing and distressing experience. Trauma may be physical, sexual, emotional, verbal, vicarious, or all the above. It might revolve in a change in worldview, meaning the world moves from a safe place to a very dangerous and haphazard place. It involves the loss of meaning. It involves a loss of clear purpose and anything related to that. And going by what's been my world for so many decades, if it's under 30 days, in fact, a lot of people who experience a traumatic event, be it a car accident or something else, most of them, it remits in 30 days or less, and it's called an acute stress disorder. If it persists longer, it's called PTSD. And there are reasons. Often, part of those reasons are that maybe it's ongoing trauma. It isn't just a single event. Now, a single event can be bad enough. I don't mean to minimize that, but some people are trapped in ongoing trauma. I'll talk about that also. All right. Now, one of our rational brain, which is in this part of our brain, is called the prefrontal lobe, and that's where more cognitive. That's where basically our wise mind comes from, so to speak, good decision making, etc. But our fear is implanted from prehistoric times when there were creatures who were bigger than us and who would eat us. And it's often called the lizard brain. And that's the hippocampus and the amygdala. They're part of our early warning system. It's part of that fight, flight, or freeze type mechanism that helped us survive long ago. Whereas the prefrontal cortex is the rational part of the brain. All right. Now, what happens for those who develop PTSD is that early warning system overrides the prefrontal lobe, and meaning that people who have ongoing trauma, often called complex trauma, they're always asking themselves, am I safe in this situation? And if they pick up on any signs consciously or subconsciously they are not, that person becomes triggered. That's why some people, it's called that proverbial straw. If somebody explodes in anger over something that seems little, that probably means they were triggered and they were traumatized, triggered, and they exploded. That happens a lot. All right. But there's hope through training and with like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, EMDR, dialectical behavior therapy, and other efficacious approaches, help is available. The mindfulness part of that, which is a part of all of those, begins in recognizing that trauma triggers like flashbacks and others are just a normal part, if I can say that, of an abnormal experience. In other words, researcher Marsha Lennon at the University of Washington, it's what she says to traumatized people. You're having a normal reaction to an abnormal experience. It's nothing strange about that. It's actually quite natural. Now, that flies in the face of conventional thought, but I would say that I buy into that line of thought, and I've experienced it and witnessed it treating traumatized patients. I'm going to talk and a couple of different types of trauma that I alluded to. Type 1 trauma, single event trauma. Now, that single event could be really horrible. So you've been in an auto accident, several people have been killed. I had a couple of clients like that. All right. Or type 2 ongoing trauma, often called complex trauma. Maybe somebody has been a victim of ongoing domestic violence, ongoing sexual abuse, something they can't get out of. Maybe they've been a prisoner of war and they've been tortured on a regular basis. And that way, the amygdala and the hippocampus and the early warning system take over. There are also pre-event and post-event factors related to trauma. Here's some pre-event factors. Previous trauma, as I spoke about. Substance abuse. Is there a genetic predisposition? Some people just seem to be hardier. Some people can fight off disease and infection better, and some than others can. Probably some people are genetically hardier than other people are. Women have a 2 times higher incident rate. Part of that is the fact of sexual abuse being so ubiquitous worldwide. And part of it is the fact that they're willing to go forward for treatment and they're more honest about what they've experienced, whereas men tend to want to macho through that. Part of that is society's conditioning. And part of it is the fact that men feel that they have to sort of buck up, and men are much more likely to use substances and not talk about it. There are also protective factors. How supportive is the family and the network of friends? How willing is the person to seek help? Healthy lifestyle, that's exercise, a healthy diet, moderate to minimal to zero alcohol or other drug consumption, non-smoking, etc. All those are pre-event factors, healthy factors and unhealthy factors. Here are event factors. How near to trauma? My sister-in-law was in a market and a bomb exploded about 50 yards away, or just over around 50 meters away. She was traumatized. Now, she did not develop PTSD, thankfully, but she was definitely traumatized. So had she been injured or had she witnessed people being killed, etc., that would have made a big difference. She was able to get out of there. But many people are not. And the other factor, of course, is ongoing trauma. The abuse doesn't stop. It continues for years and years. Post-event factors, support systems or lack of support systems. Learned helplessness versus learned optimism. I'll talk about that. It comes from psychologist Martin Seligman. Person does or does not seek treatment. And if you don't believe anything can get better, you probably don't seek treatment. Or maybe treatment's not as readily available. It's also your belief about the trauma. Do you believe you can heal? Because if you believe you can heal, you will, at least to a great extent, and you're probably more likely to seek treatment. For those who feel they cannot heal, they are less likely, and chances are they won't. The other factor of that is healthy versus unhealthy self-talk. If you believe you can heal, your self-talk in your head is probably going to be healthy. Okay, this is really awful, you say to yourself, but I'm going to get help and I'm going to heal and I'm going to do the homework that's assigned. I'm going to take this workbook that my counselor or other therapist has assigned me and I'm going to work these assignments that she or he's given me. Versus, I know this can never get better. Those are two very different types. The tipping point to healing often is the self-talk part, but that's part of the belief one can heal. All right, in terms of recognizing triggers, part of it is rating them. There's this scale called SUD scale, often called subjective units of distress scale, sometimes just called scaling. And on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being high, I can start at 0, completely relaxed, to 10, I'm in full panic mode, to somewhat in between. I call 7 to 10, the score is 7 to 10, I call that the red zone, all right? So people come to me who their anxiety is high, they've been triggered, I'll say to them, okay, on a scale of 1 to 10, how high is your anxiety right now, your fear level? And they'll say it's a 9. And I'll say, okay, we're going to do some grounding, we're going to do some breathing, we're going to do some work, some self-soothing, and we're going to get your score down at least 1 point. So we do that breathing, we do that grounding, which I'll talk about, and others, and we get their score maybe down even a couple of points, maybe more, and then we can start treatment. The bottom line in trauma treatment is we have to do soothing first. All right, we have to soothe and show there's safety, and only then can we go forward. All right. And one thing I'd say is when I started out in my late 20s doing therapy, I wasn't well trained in trauma, and neither were the people around me. We didn't do enough self-soothing. That's why the body is so important in treating trauma. It's not just the mind, it's the body also. And some of my friends would say it's also the spirit, whatever that means to a person. I'll talk about that too. All right. So in terms of lowering, here's a basic. We call it the 5 senses. And it's really easy. And because trauma means when you're triggered, you go back to that place where you were hurt, or you go to a similar place. You regress in your mind. And it's something, the trauma may have happened a decade ago or more, but you're back in that place. Or maybe you're that scared little child again. So here's some grounding exercise. Look around you. What are 5 things that you see? Looking around my office, I can see a lot more than 5 things, including the windows right here. What are 4 sounds that you hear? What are 3 things you can touch? Well, I can touch my desk, my coat, I can touch my phone. I've got this object here that means something to me. I can touch it. It brings me to the present. What are 2 smells you notice? Olfactory tends to be pretty important. And what are you tasting right now? All right. So with those grounding, it's a way of coming back to the present. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Probably the most common thing we do to help people ground, just to get out of that point where they're triggered and slow down. All right. Once we slow down, sometimes, and I've had people write this down or talk about it, and when we talk about the flashback or the triggers I'm experiencing is what? Well, I'm thinking about when my father came up the stairs at nighttime and he was going to rape me. Okay, that's what I'm thinking about. And you tell your silent, right now I'm feeling very anxious due to that memory. And I'm sensing it in my stomach as well as in my chest or wherever you're experiencing it. I tend to experience mine in my stomach. All right. I am remembering about my father's abuse. At the same time, I look around, and here's 5 things I see. All right. Here's 3 things I can hear, 4 things I can touch, 2 things I can smell, 1 thing I can taste. That tells me that 1, 2, 3, that 1 through 5 grounding, that I'm no longer back being abused by my father. It's not happening to me. I'm in my safe place right now. Maybe I'm in my office, maybe I'm in my bedroom and I'm getting ready to fall asleep, etc. Now, I might say, or I might have somebody write, well, how did the flashback look or the memory look? How did it feel, hear, smell, etc.? And have them describe that. The other is, what further action can you take to feel safer when the flashback occurs or safer after it's over? In that, sometimes in that moment, it's just the immediacy. Let's ground, and then we can start looking around and talking and feeling safe. I've had clients in therapy because they do get triggered in treatment, and we ground and we talk about how they can feel safer. And the more they do that in therapy, the more they're going to do it outside of therapy, and the safer they're going to feel outside of therapy. You might also, there's some other things in when they flash. Stomping your feet is common. Clapping your hands is common. Blinking your eyes is common, etc. Those are some other ways. I want to say something about EMDR here, which I would say is a very efficacious approach, even though it's not the one I use. It is somewhat similar to what I do. When Francine Shapiro noticed about the eye flashing, that's probably part of what was working. Was when she wasn't feeling well, it's kind of like a reset button. Now I do something called thought field therapy, which is touching, what some do tapping, and it does seemingly the same kind of thing. It taps into those meridians that acupuncture and acupressure tap into, and it's well validated. And I've used that to help people soothe. After they soothe, we can work on things. All right. Now, part of it is just in terms of dealing it after you soothe, there's some aftermath, and I give this to people I treat, and I want them to know this because we're human. You're going to have these tough moments. All right, you're healing and you're just going to have these tough moments, and we want to plan for these distressing moments. And that's the grounding 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. That's going out and taking a big breath of air. It's stomping our feet, it's clapping our hands, and if we're prepared and if we have plans and tools to deal with it, we can get through being triggered without blowing up or without hurting ourselves or somebody else. We can give ourselves permission to be emotional. And I want to say this particularly for men like myself. When I started grad school, I went to this talk by this microbiologist. I only remember one thing he said, and that's what he said. He said, if we take the tears from a rat and re-inject them into the rat will show signs of depression. He said, what I gather from that experience is that crying is the body's way of naturally releasing toxins. We should encourage people to cry more often, particularly men. So I want to say to any men out there, don't be afraid of crying. It's actually very healthy for you. It can feel very good. I was raised in the southern United States not to cry. I've had to learn to cry. It feels good sometimes. Sometimes I almost feel like I've taken a good shower. And times many people like to journal and they'll record their thoughts and feelings. Record when you successfully manage that trigger. Okay, you're going to be triggered. It's going to happen. But through your 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, you manage it. Through stomping your feet, clapping your hands, you manage it. Through your yoga that you practice 3 times a week, your dancing, your jogging, whatever it is, that also helps. The body sort of, it stores it. Bessel van der Kolk, let me just has this great book called The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body and the Healing of Trauma. And he says, you got to get it out of your body. He's absolutely right. I found that with the people I've treated. Sometimes it's just performing a monotonous activity to distract yourself after you've been triggered, and maybe you still have some feelings. Maybe that's cleaning your house. For me, it was washing the dishes. Maybe my some work crossword puzzles or do something else. So sometimes just a little transitional activity. And you do that maybe after you've done your 1 through 5 or your foot stomping, your hand clapping, whatever it is. Here's something else. When I was at one point I was going to live in a monastery. That didn't work out, but I learned a lot how to meditate. Slow intake breathing through my nose and exhaling through my mouth with the mantra of telling myself, you are enough, or you are strong, or you can heal. And that slow meditative breathing is also a way of starting to slow down those racing thoughts we get when we're traumatized, when we're anxious. And just even a minute of that can help. Deep breaths. When I used to have 7 clients a day, I used to meditate between sessions. Sometimes it was only 60 seconds long. All right, and I'll talk about where I got that from a little bit later, but it helped. It kept me from carrying something from one session with a patient into the next session. Also, physical fitness, the joy of movement. There's a woman named Kelly McGonigal, who's a health psychologist at Stanford, and she talks about the research on how body movement is so effective in managing anxiety, depression, etc. And she also talks about all the social anxiety she felt. And what she does is she's a yoga teacher and she loves to dance and all that. For me, it's running, it's yoga, it's power walking, and all that. Some people use art to help them deal with their traumatic memories. Drawing, painting, collage. And part of that is saying, here's where I started. Here's the pain I felt in my body and it was on my face. And over time, through treatment and healing, coming up with a different collage, a different painting, drawing, and all that, whatever it is that works for you. But the idea is acknowledging your healing, telling yourself that you're healing and being able to point to concrete signs for that. Creating a safe place. That can be a physical location, maybe in your home, maybe out on a picnic table above the lake or the seashore. In mine, it's at bed at nighttime. I'll put on a rain program, and I feel really safe. I feel really cozy with that sound of rain and in my bed and feeling warm and safe and dry. And I tell myself, I am safe. I am comfortable. I am well. Those self-statements that you tell yourself are important because you start to believe them. And if you tell yourself you're unsafe and you can't heal, you will believe that. You want to believe that you can heal. Also, calming music. For me, it's jazz sometimes, and sometimes it's classical music, and sometimes it's something spiritual. It just depends on the mood I am, but it tends to help also. All right. I want to talk a little more about journaling. I've worked with a lot of people. One of the most amazing people I worked with was a 12-year-old South African girl. She was a young Zulu girl, had experienced tremendous trauma. She was an orphan that was in one of the orphanages I volunteered in. And I volunteered in, I think about 10 or 12, lost track. It was quite a few on 3 different summers. But some ways to do this is writing down and being honest. What are the positive and negative ways I've reacted to triggers? Have I blown up at people? Have I gotten physical? Have I self-abused? Have I cut or burned myself, etc.? But what are the positive ways? What are the growth? Positive ways could be I did my 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 grounding. I did my breathing. I got up and got physical. I cleaned my house. I checked in with a friend when I was ready. I got back into therapy as soon as I could. Part of it too is writing about the trauma associated with the persons or places, whoever it is that abused you, and how you're healing from that, and how you're going to be ready to move forward. Part of it's thinking too of ways you might deal with each of these triggers and how they have taken the power from you, but now how you're taking that power back. You're telling yourself, here's ways I've taken my power back. I've healed. I no longer hear that voice in my head. And if I do hear that voice from the abuser, I'm able to block it out and silence it. Met a Holocaust survivor who was about 90 years old. She was a friend of my mother-in-law. And I noticed it was summertime, and I noticed the faded tattoo, her number on her arm. That was her inmate number. And she saw me, and I couldn't help but see it. And she said, every day when I see that, I'm triggered. But she said, I say to my tattoo, you did not destroy me. I lived. I had children and grandchildren. I defeated you. I defeated you. You lost. I won. That was powerful. And I said, how long have you been doing that? She said, since Liberation Day. More than 6 decades. All right. So write about your success. Acknowledge your resilience. Where does your success come from? Where does your strength and resilience come from? And also you want to write then that one day you're going to be healed. You're going to move from survivor to thriver. The triggers will have gone, the flashbacks have left, and you're going to feel free. And even if once occasionally you get it, you will know how to deal with that flashback or that trigger. And when you get to that place of feeling healed, what's going to be different about you? What will you notice about feeling healed, about being liberated from that prison of pain? What would others notice? Now, let me say something. Nobody wants trauma to have to grow. Nobody. Absolutely nobody in this world has ever said that. And it's not fair that you've been traumatized. It's totally unfair. It happens. We all know that. It happens. So part of it is as you move through these stages of trauma healing, what have you learned in the process? What have you learned about yourself? What have you learned about your strength? All right. What have you learned that helps you move forward in life, that may help you help a friend or a family member? It's all very important. A great deal about this life, as we know, is it's about learning and moving forward. All right, I'm going to talk about some resources, and there's all sorts of resources. One is called 101 Trauma Informed Interventions, Activities, Exercises, and Assignments to Move the Client and Therapy Forward by Linda Curran, and it's Pesci Publishing and Media. I find that workbook very, very helpful. Now, everybody has their favorites. Now, here's another one I really like. And I've used this one that's in the second edition. I've used this one forever. The PTSD Workbook, third edition, Simple Effective Techniques for Overcoming Trauma Symptoms. It's Mary Beth Williams and Celia Pajoli, and it's by New Harbinger. And that's probably my favorite, but the other one, 101 Trauma Informed Interventions, I've found real helpful also. The book, The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk, Penguin Books. And I mentioned it earlier. Very, very helpful. And van der Kolk, what I like about it, he's very realistic and talks about his own struggles. Here's a book I also mentioned, very different, but a lot of fun. The Joy of Movement, How Exercises Helps Us Find Happiness, Hope, Connection, and Courage by Kelly McGonigal, Avery Penguin Books. A short read, but very helpful. You can also catch Kelly McGonigal on TED Talks, and she has other interviews and such. And she talks a lot about the science of it. She says, what exercise and other movement, like yoga does, is it stimulates the hope molecules in the brain. I like that. Now there are longer, more fancier titles, but I like the way of saying hope molecules because it's something I can remember as well. All right. Now, regarding, I mentioned self-talk. I was trained to be a cognitive behavioral therapist, and cognitive behavioral therapy in most ways is the most efficacious approach. Now, but it does need help. We also need to work with the body. That's where the mindfulness part comes in. That's where the breathing comes in. That's where the yoga and the massage, that's where the fitness comes in, and all these other things that we talk about. That's where the touching and tapping I talk about come in. But this is important, and it's where it starts to a great extent after we self-soothe. Notice the messages you give yourself, and we're human. We're going to give each other unhealthy messages at times, but we need to check those messages out. And the standard way to check it out as a cognitive therapist that I do is I'll say, when I say I'm dumb, I will say, okay, Shannon, what's the evidence that you're dumb? Well, you have a PhD. Now, that doesn't mean you're brilliant. You have these other degrees. You're successful. You have many publications. You have friends, etc. I'd say the evidence is you're not dumb. Not saying you're Einstein, but you're not dumb and you're quite capable. So instead of saying I am dumb or I am worthless, I am a capable person, or I am a lovable, worthwhile person. From I am weak to I'm a very resilient person. Anybody who's experienced trauma and continues going forward is a very resilient person. You are also. And it's important you tell yourself that because you'll start to believe it. And you want to believe that you are resilient. From I am a trauma victim to I am a survivor and will become a thriver. I am a survivor and I will become a thriver. I think of one 18-year-old I treated. She was a sexual captive for more than 5 years, kidnapped when she was 12, kept in a dark, windowless basement, often chained, violated daily, multiple times a day, etc. And I said to her, by the time I got her, I said, how did you keep your hope alive? And she said, it's what I told myself. She said, every day I told myself one day I would escape my abuser and I would make him pay. And she did. He got careless. He took her out to eat at somewhere like a McDonald's. She made an excuse to go to the bathroom, went into the kitchen, told the manager. He called the police, and the man was arrested and went away for a long time. And then she told herself, I'm going to heal, and one day I'm going to help people like me. She met every treatment objective, even though she was the most traumatized person I'd ever worked with, because she believed she could. And because she believed she could, as difficult as treatment was, she did all the homework, she did everything in session, and she moved forward. It was hard. It wasn't easy. It wasn't pretty. There was regression and setback, but she believed and she got through it. Maybe one of the strongest emotional people I've ever met. All right. And most importantly, from no one loves me to have learned to love myself. And there are people who love you. And I'd suggest think of 3 or 4 people who do love you, whom you love. Route them down, okay? Route them down. Now, one of the orphans I worked with, she was real sad. And she said, well, I said, what are you sad about? Well, as an orphan, there would be quite a bit to be sad, but I wanted to dialogue with her. And she said, no one loves me. I said, no one. She said, no. And I said, well, I noticed you were hand in hand with a person you told me she was a friend. Does she love you? And she said, I'll ask. So she ran over and asked her 10-year-old friend. She said, oh, yeah, I love you. And they hugged. She came back, oh, she loves me. I said, well, you told me that your auntie, who the auntie was the house mother, you said she loves you. She said, that's right. That's 2 people. And I said, okay, before I leave in 3 days, see if you can find at least one other person. Well, she found like 4 that she brought to talk with me. So who are those people? And sometimes we need to tell people, I love you, just without any sense of expectation or ownership. Now, there's part of the tough thing in trauma is we turn it on ourselves. By telling ourselves that we're worthless and that we're not worthy of love and that we're weak. All these are lies. That's the trauma talking. That's the lizard brain talking. We got to learn to turn that volume down through grounding, through breathing, also through telling ourselves we're worthwhile, that we're strong people, etc. But people can start burning and cutting and biting and doing all sorts of things. Again, when you're tempted to do that, or when I tell people, let's use our 5 grounding techniques. What are 5 things you see? What are 4 things you hear? 3 things you smell? 2 things you can touch? Whatever. 1 thing you can touch, whatever it is. All right. Some also talk about, the 4 square breathing really slow. It's what I talked about earlier. But they count to it 4, about 1001 silently, and releasing it slow, count through 4 seconds, and doing that for a second or 2, or for a minute or 2, or whatever. Also talked about distracting, again, cleaning house, washing dishes, taking a walk, whatever, writing in your journal about how you're managing the trauma. I talked again, the mindful meditation, the 4 square, etc. And also while you're doing that, telling yourself that mantra of, I will heal. I am safe. I am strong. Now, if that doesn't work, and sometimes things happen, there's a lot going on in our lives in addition to healing from trauma. You might have to call the crisis line, okay? Or if you don't feel it's that extreme, talking with a friend or a close family member is important. But or holding a favorite object. But always remember, you've got several options. If what doesn't work, if the breathing doesn't work, if the grounding doesn't work, if the journaling doesn't work, if the dancing or running doesn't work, then talking with a professional through the lifeline or the crisis services, talking with a friend, etc. Make sure you've written down several options. You always want several options because sometimes, most of the time, your plan works, but sometimes things are extreme. Maybe there's a lot going on at work or in your personal life, and you need somebody else. You need, whether it's if you're not in counseling, getting back in counseling, maybe sometimes just talking with a really good friend who understands you. I want to talk a little bit about mindful meditation. Now there is a slight risk, and this is why I often would say we'll just do breathing and instead of meditation. I would teach people I'm working with who've been traumatized this in my session. I would say, we're going to do this very briefly for 1 minute. Now, remember, if for some reason this leaves you feeling more traumatized, because sometimes if they don't use a mantra or they don't focus on their breath, their mind will go to these unpleasant places. That's very natural. But part of dealing with that is the breathing, focusing on the mantra, etc., or the grounding or whatever. So a person can sit on a yoga mat or in a comfortable chair, or even they can do walking meditations like we did in the monastery. And that's again inhaling slowly through that nose and exhaling slowly through the mouth. You can do 3 to 4 seconds, four square breathing or three cubed breathing, but just keep the breathing slow and rhythmic. And I recommend a mantra. I am whole. I am strong. I am capable. I am worthy of love. Something, whatever works for you. You can write your own. Make sure it's healthy. Make sure it helps you uplift you. When your mind wanders, and it will, because if Dalai Lama and Thich Nhat Hanh and others have mind wandering, you will too, and I certainly do. And I've been meditating more than 30 years. But when your mind wanders, focus on your breath and focus on the mantra. Notice it. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about those distractions are just like leaves on a floating river. That's what they are. Focus on the breathing and the mantra. Notice how much your pulse changes after a couple of minutes of this meditative breathing. Notice how your body becomes more relaxed. Each class I teach starts with a 2-minute meditation. I can notice in 10 seconds how much more relaxed I get. Most of my students comment on that also. Before ending the meditation, a couple of things. You might blink your eyes 3 times. All right, I do that sometimes. Or like what I do most of the time, acknowledge 3 gratitudes. Here's my 3 gratitudes. I do this every morning also. I'm grateful for my health. I'm grateful for my best friend who doubles as my spouse. Number 3, I am grateful that I found a profession that I would love, and that it's often difficult and at times stressful, but I'm really thankful I found something I enjoy doing for a career, because I wondered when I was young if I ever would. Sometimes I'll do 5 gratitudes, but at a minimum of 3. All right. Um, the other thing I want to say, just in talking about that, is that part of what happens when, again, when we get traumatized, is the chemistry in our brain changes. Now, I want to go back to the statement by Kelly McGonigal when she talks about hope molecules. So here's what's really interesting. When we start practicing these mindfulness-based activities, it starts to slow down our early warning system. I talked about the lizard brain. I have a colleague, he has a training and he calls it taming the lizard. And what he's doing in that is he's basically quieting that early warning system. So the person hears, they get traumatized, they start telling themselves those negative self statements. Pretty soon, their SUD score goes from a 3 to a 9 or 10. So then we've got to help that person self soothe, either through grounding 1 through 3, 4, 5. And I would often, if this were a different one, I would teach you the tapping points. I've used these tapping points with my clients and patients, and it almost always seems to relax everybody at least a couple of points. So somebody with a 10 is an 8. I've had people go from a 10 to a 3. But anyway, it tends to help. I think part of it is it's a reset button and brings them back to the present. And that means that the lizard is no longer in control. Pretty soon your prefrontal cortex is back in control, and that's the way that we want it. Because what happens when the person is triggered is epinephrine gets going, and cortisol, which is part of your early warning system, starts coursing through your brain. Over time, it can start to erode those pathways. When we're doing grounding, when we're doing meditation, when we're doing mindful movement like yoga and jogging, swimming, or walking, dancing, whatever it is that you enjoy, when those hope molecules start coursing, you're creating new neural pathways. It was once believed that when we were born, we were given X amount of brain cells, and that's it. And research in the last 15 years has documented that's not true. So Kelly McGonigal says those hope molecules and such, they're helping produce and grow new neural pathways, which is going to be helpful for brain development. The other part of that is the mindful movement plus the meditation, plus the grounding and plus the journaling or whatever it is that you're doing. It probably keeps your brain more active. It doesn't mean that it's going to stop something like early dementia or Alzheimer's, but it may well delay it. What I can tell you that's well validated is it helps you heal from trauma. All right. So be aware of that. Work your self-talk. Change from when you're telling yourself that you're stupid and worthless, say, what's the evidence? Well, the evidence doesn't support that. I'm educated. I've done well in my career. I have people who love me. Evidence doesn't support that. Anytime you give yourself those negative messages, challenge it. At least find 3 to 5 times during the day that you challenge it. It helps. If meditation is not your thing, get up and get active and walk. All right. Do the mindful movement. And you don't even have to call it meditation, just call it mindful breathing. Do those grounding techniques, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, etc. Whatever works. Get active with your hobby, your painting, your drawing, your writing, working crossword puzzles, whatever it is. All right. The good news is that for people who enter into therapy and who believe they can heal their triggers and their trauma, the chances are excellent that they will, at least to a great extent. Even people like my client who was a sex slave captive for more than 5 years, she met every treatment goal. And I told her in the future, I said, at times in the future, given what you've been through, it would be natural if you re-experienced trauma and were triggered from time to time. But take what we've learned here, the tapping and the touching, the grounding techniques, the meditation, the mindful movement. And she was a very spiritual young woman. Your faith in your higher power, what she called God. Take all of that and use that. Make sure you check in and tell with people who you love. Create those social supports. And when you need to periodically, come back in for counseling. It might just be a few sessions to help yourself, kind of like an emotional checkup, but that's available as well. All right. If you want to write me at some time, have any questions, it would not be therapy or anything, but my email is shannonhodges36@gmail.com. And if you have any questions about references, I can point you in that direction. I wish you the very, very best in your healing and your staying healthy. And, what I would say is just do your work and keep it up. And chances are that you'll move forward. Thank you very much. I hope this has been helpful.